How to execute fast. To find out, let's do a thought experiment. I'd like you to imagine that you're standing in the middle of a racquetball court, and at your feet is a basketball. You decide to wind up and give the ball a kick, and the ball shoots across the floor, hits a wall, careens in another direction, and finally comes to a rest. You walk over, pick up the ball, bring it back to the center of the floor, and you give it a hard kick now, much harder. Bam! The ball obviously shoots across the floor much faster. It hits the wall harder, careens off in another direction before striking another wall, and it finally comes to rest again. You just experienced Newton's 3 laws of motion, and surprisingly, Newton's 3 laws of motion provide the secret to creating fast execution in your business. Allow me to explain. Newton's first law of motion says this: an object's going to tend to do what it's been doing. So that's why the basketball just sits there in the middle of the floor. And once you give it a kick, it does something different. The only thing that causes the basketball to stop is the friction on the floor or when it meets the wall. The same thing is true with your business. It's going to tend to do what it's been doing. If your business is slow and stagnant, it's going to continue to act that way unless you apply a force, in this case, a force of change, to get your business to do something new. On the other hand, if your business is experiencing a lot of momentum, like a train roaring down the tracks, that inertia is going to work in your favor. It's going to continue to show momentum unless it's acted upon by an outside force, a decision inside the company or a force outside in the marketplace. Newton's second law of motion is defined with a simple formula: F equals ma. When you kick the ball harder the second time, the ball showed more acceleration. The same thing is true for your business. If you want to get the business to move faster in a chosen direction, then you need to apply a strong force of change. Now you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense at all. If that was true, why can't I kick my business and get it to move in a different direction? Or why can't I tell my kids what to do and they'll quickly clean up their room every time? Life doesn't work that way, right? Well, it doesn't work that way, but it's not for the reason you might be thinking. The reason life doesn't work that way is that mass is not size or volume. Mass is resistance to change. So the reason that your business doesn't respond to your directives is that the mass isn't neatly self-contained like a basketball. Instead, it's spread out all over the place. It exists in the individuals, in the processes, in the systems in your organization. It's kind of like trying to kick a ball of shattered glass. There's nothing there to kick. There's no nicely contained object to apply a force of change to. That's exactly like your business. The mass is scattered everywhere. But if you were somehow able to gather in the mass, gather in the resistance to change, then you could apply a force of change and the organization would quickly go in another direction. Newton's third law of motion is really just a reminder that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's why in your business, if sales are booming, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. Maybe your administrative systems are starting to fall apart, or your customer service staff is overworked. So as you're making decisions, keep in mind that every action you take has an equal and opposite reaction somewhere in the system. Understanding Newton's 3 laws of motion allows us to conceptualize how to execute quickly in your business. I call this the execution diamond. The M in the middle stands for the mass, or the resistance to change in your organization. This mass is kept neatly corralled or coalesced by aligning 4 key subsystems. The first and most important is aligned vision and values. The next is an aligned structure. After that comes an aligned decision-making and implementation process. And finally, having aligned people. Now, another thought experiment: if you were sent out into the Wild West and you had a mission to capture some wild horses, the first thing you do would be to build a corral. You can consider these subsystems of the execution diamond like a corral, 4 sides to the corral, that keeps the mass of the organization reasonably well contained. Then it's possible to apply a force of change, like a decision, and quickly get the organization to do something new. Now, I want to go through all 4 sides of the execution diamond so you have a sense for what you need to align and why it's so important. The first side of the execution diamond is called vision and values, and you really need to have aligned vision and values. The reason why is there are basically 3 sources of mass, or 3 sources of resistance to change in your organization. The first and most deadly is a conflict of vision and values. The reason it's most deadly is that a conflict of vision and values is non-negotiable. For instance, if you and I were going to take a road trip and we started out in New York and you wanted to go to Toronto, but I wanted to go to Mexico, we couldn't go on a road trip together, could we? We'd have to find new methods of transportation where we each could get where we wanted to go. That's vision. Values is how we agree to behave. So if you and your spouse are in marriage counseling, A marriage counselor can help you negotiate a lot of different conflicts, but if you have a conflict of values, there's not much that the marriage counselor can do. For instance, if you value monogamy, but your spouse values polygamy, well, you can talk a lot, but the relationship fundamentally isn't going to work because there's a conflict of values. So within an organization, for it to execute quickly in one direction, it must have aligned vision and values. It's non-negotiable. The next biggest source of mass is a conflict of interest. Now, conflict of interest simply means that what's good for you isn't necessarily good for me. Now, conflict of interest can be negotiated, and how you do that is actually having aligned vision and values. Our aligned vision and values in both of us, right? I'm willing to give to you. I trust that later on it'll come back to me. There's give and there's take. And what you'll find is that a conflict of interest can actually be harnessed to make a better decision, a decision that will get implemented quickly. And there's a third source of mass. It's called a conflict of styles. And what this simply means is that your management style, your behavioral style might be radically different than my own. If you're a highly innovative, creative individual and you see every problem as an opportunity to come up with a new solution, but I'm more of a stabilizer, detail-oriented person who prefers to move a little bit more methodically and prudently, and I like to control things, well, your style might just rub my style the wrong way, and vice versa. The language you use, the pace you move at, the approach you take, your time frame, all those things can create a conflict of styles. Now, just like a conflict of interest, a conflict of styles can be harnessed in such a way that it leads to better decisions that get implemented more quickly. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So these are the three sources of mass in an organization, and two of them are negotiable. They actually can be harnessed so that conflict becomes constructive. But a conflict of vision and values, you simply cannot allow it in the organization. If there is a conflict of vision and values, the only option ultimately is to split the organization. Now, the next most important thing to have aligned in your business is an aligned structure. Structure simply means the design of the thing. Now, good design supports the purpose. If you're sitting in a chair right now, if it's a good, comfortable chair, it simply means that it has a design that supports its purpose. Now, your business has a design, whether you're conscious of it or not, and it has nothing to do with the org chart. What creates the design of your business is the functions that it performs, where those functions are placed relative to the other functions, and the authority that you delegate to each function. Now, your organization could be designed like a rocket, or it can be designed like a parachute. And what you want, of course, to move quickly is an organizational design whose purpose is to support the strategy that you want to execute on. There are principles to designing a structure, just like there are principles to designing a rocket or designing a parachute. And some of the principles are that every time you change the strategy, you want to blow up your structure. You want to redesign your structure from a clean slate in order to support your strategy. If you don't change the structure, what happens is that you make a commitment to do a new strategy, but the old power centers in the structure exist. And so the organization kind of heads in the direction it was headed in due to inertia. So you want to start from a clean slate. When you're designing your structure, you never want to put functions that are focused on efficiency, which is doing the thing right, making things controllable and repeatable and accurate and high quality, in charge of functions that are about effectiveness. Effectiveness is about being creative and adaptive and flexible and meeting customer needs. So intuitively, you'd never put operations in charge of sales, right? If you did that, you quickly lose the effectiveness of your sales function, which is where the revenue comes in for your business. Instead, sales would become an operational function, very efficient and controllable, not effective to meeting changing customer requirements out there in the marketplace. Another rule, you'd never put functions that are about long-range development under functions that are about short-range execution. For example, if you're working too hard in your career, I'm willing to bet that one of the first things to go is your exercise routine, right? You're working too long at the office, you don't have any time or energy to go off and exercise. Well, exercise is a long-range effectiveness function. If you put it under a short-range function, you're quickly going to lose its effectiveness. It's not going to get the attention and time and effort that it needs because we tend to focus on short-range things that have to get done now. So, for instance, you never put marketing in the structure under sales. Sales is a short-range effectiveness function, while marketing is a long-range effectiveness function. You want to give marketing space and autonomy to be focused on the long range, while simultaneously supporting sales in its endeavors. Final rule of structure is you always want to make sure you're putting the right style of person into the role that matches their style. You wouldn't take a high stabilizing style, say in operations, and put that in charge of human resources development, which needs a totally different style, people-oriented, long-range development-oriented. That's very different than an operator style. So you want to align the styles of people into the roles that they need to perform. That's structure. Once you have aligned vision and values, and once you have an aligned structure, then process really brings the structure and the vision and values alive. It's what allows your organization to move quickly. And the secret to fast execution is to make good decisions and implement them quickly and keep repeating that process. It's funny that most organizations are highly aware of their different processes. They know their sales process, their financing process, their customer service process, but the most important process in any business is the process of making good decisions and implementing them quickly. If you think about it, your business is really a decision-making and implementation machine. And so focusing on this process and doing it right allows you to execute quickly. Let me give you an example. This is what I call the Dances with Wolves management meeting, and it's just a reflection of a really well-run decision-making and implementation process. When you're watching the video clip, I want you to notice several things. First, I want you to notice that there's a lot of conflict in the meeting. What's happening is that the tribal elders have gathered together to discuss what to do about the Europeans invading their territory. There's a fierce debate of ideas going on in the meeting. Should we fight them? Should we flee? Should we do nothing? Okay? But you'll notice that the tribe is not attacking one another. They're attacking the ideas. They're not attacking the tribe members. There's a big difference, and you want to do the former, not the latter. The other thing I want you to notice is that it's not a democracy. It's a participative process, but there's clearly one decision maker in the tribe. It happens to be the tribe elder, the gentleman with the white hair. You too need one decision maker in your meetings. It's a participative process, but it's not a democratic process. Whoever's going to accept the implementation needs to make the decision. The third thing I want you to notice is that it's hard to figure out what to do. There's insufficient data. There's competing ideas. The same thing is true in your business. You're never going to have all the data you need. You're always going to have a conflict of opinion. It's never going to be easy to figure out what to do, but a good decision is one that will lead the organization forward in its purpose and do it in such a way that it's faster than the surrounding pace of change. The fourth thing I want you to notice is that whoever was going to be impacted downstream by the decision, they involved a critical mass of leaders up front in the decision-making process itself. There's not just a few people in this meeting. It's a big meeting. The reason why this is important is imagine a decision was reached with just a few people, an insufficient critical mass of people. If that decision was made, whatever it was, and it filtered out to the tribe, there would be a lot of resistance to change. Why are we fighting? Why are we fleeing? Why are we doing nothing? I don't get it. I'm not behind this, right? But by involving a critical mass of leaders in the decision-making process itself, once that decision is reached, the tribe had a chance to buy into it. And so when those tribe elders go out into the tribe, they're there to reinforce it, to explain it, to get the rest of the tribe moving forward as one unit. The fifth thing I want you to notice is once a decision is reached, that meeting is over. They reinforce the decision and they're out of there. Now let's watch and see what happens. Here comes the first opinion. Everybody's listening. They're not on their phones. They're not doing Facebook. Here comes a different opinion. People are listening, seeking mutual understanding. More debate. It's okay to debate the decision up front. It's not okay to debate the decision after it's made. So you want to invest sufficient time, and it takes time up front to gather different viewpoints, gather different data points, so that a well-rounded decision can be reached. And now here comes the decision. Decision is reached, everybody reinforces, and the meeting breaks, they're off. Now, it's not possible to gather everyone who's going to be impacted downstream by a decision and involve them upstream in the decision-making process itself. So, who you need to involve is only a minimal amount of mass. And a minimal amount of mass, by definition, means the person with authority. That's the legal right to say yes and no to the decision. Many people can say no in an organization. Very few can say yes and no. So whoever is the lowest level of authority to say yes and no, you need to get them involved in the decision itself. You also need to involve any of those with power. Power are those who can help you or hinder you in achieving your objective. And you also need to include anybody with influence. Influence is the ability to get what you want without relying on authority or power to get it. For instance, I'm using influence right now in this video. I have no authority or power. If your task is small enough, then you don't need to worry about any of this. Just go and execute. You have your own coalesced authority, power, and influence. But if your task is big, which means it's cross-functional, the authorities over there, the power centers are over here, the influence centers are over here, you have to invest time and energy to gather in that mass. Then you can enact a force of change through an effective decision-making process. And if you've gathered sufficient mass, and if you've run a good decision-making process, bam, your organization will quickly go in the chosen direction. Now, I want you to notice that in order to gather a critical mass of authority, power, and influence for the decision, you need to rely on your own level of authority, power, and influence to do so. Authority, which is your legal right to say yes or no to something, is very fast, but it loses its power over time. It weakens over time. So for example, if you have to tell your kids, do it because I'm your parent, that might work once, but it loses its effectiveness each time you go to that well. So you want to rely on your own authority to get stuff done very minimally, if ever. Power, on the other hand, is that ability to help or hinder. It doesn't act as fast as authority, but it doesn't lose its effectiveness over time either. Basically, you want to use your power to help others, and then in turn, that will come back to you when you need their help. Now, influence is the slowest to develop over time, but it's also the strongest. It grows in its power and effectiveness over time. That's why politicians and celebrities treat their brand with so much attention. It takes a lot of energy and effort to build up influence over time. So if there's a crisis in a politician or an artist's brand, people will quickly try to repair that to restore the original brand image because influence is so powerful. Now, once you gather in a critical mass of authority, power, and influence, you need to take them through a good decision-making process. A good decision-making process doesn't jump to conclusions. It takes time to make a good decision. In fact, the right rhythm here is to take time in the decision so you can move fast on the implementation. It's not good enough to have a quick decision that gets implemented slowly. You need good decisions, well-baked decisions that in turn can get implemented quickly by virtue of having the right people in the room going through a good decision-making process together. So the 6-step decision-making process comes from the Agile Alliance, and it's very simple, it's very powerful. First, you set the stage, which means you get mind and body in the room or on the phone, and you clarify why the meeting is happening. Then you want to gather data. Now, the data will be qualitative and quantitative, and everybody in that meeting will have a different perspective on the situation or problem. You want to gather that data before you start to generate insights so that you're working from a common data set. With a common data set, now you generate insights. Those insights need to go down to a further level of decision making where you really clarify who, what, when, why, and how. From there, you decide what to do. Once you decide what to do, you create an action plan and then you reinforce. Now, when you're in the decision-making process, you'll actually spend most of your time in the early part of the process, setting the stage, gathering data, generating insights. And if you do that correctly, it'll be very fast and easy to get down into deciding what to do, creating an action plan, and reinforcing it. So remember, slow down in order to go fast. The last side of the execution diamond was people. And we're trained to think about finding the best people possible. But you've heard the saying that a bad system will defeat a good person every time, and it's true. Rather than putting all your energy and effort into finding the right people, instead, put most of your energy and effort into aligning vision and values, aligning the structure, and having a good decision-making and implementation process. If you align there, then the right people will be attracted to your organization, and once they're in place, they'll have a real opportunity to thrive. Most people fail not because they're misaligned people, but because they're dealing with an environment where there's either misaligned vision and values, a misaligned structure, a poor process, or they're just simply misaligned style, personal style to the role they need to perform. So if you can align those things, your people will start to show up at a really high level. So here's the execution diamond. The secret to fast execution is you got to gather the mass. The mass is spread out all over your organization. You want to keep it aligned with aligned vision and values, structure, process, and the right people in the right roles. And that will allow you to make good decisions and implement them quickly, time and time again. In short, to execute fast, gather the mass.